Do not buy an apartment in New York City in 2025. You may be hearing that in the news and about real estate in general, but is it actually true? Generally speaking, New York City does not mimic what may be going on in the rest of the nation when it comes to the real estate market. We're sort of our own little bubble with our own little criteria and rules and regulations, so we often don't follow what's happening in the rest of the markets. I can also confidently say that as an apartment owner in New York City myself, that most usually whatever you're going to buy is going to be a solid investment because over time it is going to appreciate and give you a good return. But to be fair, let's look at some of the cons that's going on in the market right now for New York City that might influence your decision to buy an apartment in 2025. I'm Dewey Moss. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button, and let's dive right in. Of course, one of the big cons right now about buying really anything in any market is the high interest rates. And we certainly can't talk about real estate purchases without talking about those interest rates. Now, largely, I feel that this is generational because a younger generation who may be looking to buy their first homes, we're very used to seeing those 2 and 3 and maybe on the high side 4%. So it feels rather shocking. For us that have been around a little bit longer, I can certainly tell you my very first interest rate many years ago on a house that I purchased was 8.5%. And that was the really good interest rate, the one that you got if you had really good assets and good credit and such. And of course, as a child, I remember the 80s where those interest rates were way high into the 11s and 12s. So it is relative over a period of time. Things do change. And if we were to look at a 50-year mortgage interest chart, you can certainly see that the norms are in the sixes. And in fact, many of the mortgage brokers that I work with who have had longer careers say that the majority of mortgages that they have underwritten have been in the sixes when it comes to interest rates. So are interest rates really bad right now? Maybe not. If they go into those 7s, we're looking at higher interest rates if they stay there or they continue to go up. But the fluctuation in that 6% and the differences can make a real difference in people's pockets. So for New York City, because we look at debt to income ratio for many of the co-ops and the co-op board rules that you have to be able to qualify for to be able to buy into a co-op, sometimes that knocks people out of a certain price point, which also may knock people out of a certain size of apartment in a certain neighborhood. So very small changes in your finances can make a really big impact in the kind of apartment you can buy in New York City. So are the interest rates bad? They're pretty much normal. Can they affect what you can afford in New York City at this point in time? Absolutely. Will they go down in the future? Who knows? Will they go up in the future? Who knows? So is this really a con that is highly personal? We need to take a look at your finances. We need to do analysis and really see what you can afford in New York City because of these higher interest rates. Another con when it comes to people's finances are the fluctuations in the stock market. I'm sure you've seen the news. It's been way up. It's been way down. It's recovered and then it is bad the next day. It's been really a roller coaster ride and we don't know when those markets are going to settle. So why is that important? Well, so many people have their liquid assets in the stock market or in other funds and what have you, and co-ops look at your liquid assets. So we call that post-close liquidity. So one of the criteria that many boards want to look at besides your debt to income ratio, which definitely needs to be under 30%, preferably around 25%, they tend to look at your liquid assets and want to have at least 2 years of maintenance and mortgage payments somewhere in liquid form in an account. Well, for many people on any price point level, that may be a lot of money. This is post-close. So this is not money that you're using for all of your closing expenses. It is money that needs to be sitting somewhere untouched that you can prove that you have. Now, why do co-ops do this? Well, co-ops want to make sure that as a shareholder coming into that company, that you are a financially secure shareholder. So it's a way of looking at your overall expenses and making sure that you're going to be financially secure, be able to cover all of your expenses and not bring the corporation and the rest of the shareholders in that corporation down with you if you can afford to make your payments. Also, you have to remember that New York City apartments have very high down payment requirements, and those are set by the boards of the buildings. In general, 10% is expected for condos, but the boards of the co-ops can make any rules they want. So sometimes that's 20%, 25%, even going up to 40% in some co-ops. So that's a lot of money just for the down payment. And many people use their savings for down payments, which eats into their liquidity. I'm sure you're seeing what I'm saying. So with that stock market fluctuation, it affects many people's savings and again, pushes those requirements sort of out the door. You may not have as much liquidity, so you may need to look at a different price point. This is definitely a con right now for many people. So if you are in that situation, you may want to wait and see what the stock market does and make sure that your liquidity is really good for a purchase in New York City. And of course, what else is in the news every day? And that is the tariffs. Well, you may say, well, does that really affect me in terms of buying an apartment? Well, what it does affect is the building's maintenance payment or common charges, because those common charges or maintenance payments, as we call them in co-ops, are designed to cover all of the building's expenses, right? You're paying for the upkeep of the building. And there are many things that affect that maintenance payment in New York City. One, for example, is called Local Law 11. You may have seen scaffolding around the buildings in New York City where they have to go and they have to repoint bricks and they have to repair things so that things aren't falling on people's heads. That's a really, really good thing, but it is a requirement. And that scaffolding costs money and those repairs cost money, and it has skyrocketed. So if a building isn't particularly healthy and hasn't got the reserve funds to pay for that, then there may be assessments added on to the maintenance, and those assessments may be high. Some buildings are having to up their maintenance payments pretty big for the years to come because they want to make sure that they are covering all their expenses in the future. So some maintenance payments are going up 8%, 10%, 15%, seeing these rising costs. And tariffs are going to affect all of those supplies needed to run a building. So what's going to happen with all those tariffs? Well, some are being backed off on and some are changing, and it's an ongoing sort of moving target right now. We don't know what's going to happen, but for right now, I would say that's a definite con. Can you still find buildings that are very healthy, that won't be affected by this, that have healthy reserves, that are going to be able to cover those kinds of expenses? Absolutely, you can. And that's part of why you would want to work with a seasoned agent to help you weed through all those buildings and really understand those costs and what you might expect in the future. But tariffs right now, definitely a con for buying in 2025. Now, because of all these factors that we're talking about, I would say that New York City is in a healthy real estate market. We're meeting all the expected numbers for a good, decent market right now, but we are very much in a neutral market. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, we're not in a seller's market. We're not in a buyer's market either. Now, in that gray area, a lot of deals can be done and some good deals can be done, but that also means that sellers aren't necessarily crazy about selling right now because it's not a seller's market. Why would you? Unless you really need to sell or want to sell, or you're not going to be affected so much by the market because you're going to make a good amount of money on whenever you sell your apartment. But to maximize that sale, many sellers are choosing not to sell right now. So we do have a rather tight market when it comes to inventory, and some buyers just are not finding that apartment that they want. There's always going to be a compromise when buying in New York City. I can tell you that in any price point, that $20 million apartment still may not have exactly what you want, and certainly the $500,000 apartment may not meet all your criteria, but you usually can find something that really checks most of the boxes. But buyers may not be finding that when there's limited inventory and a little bit more competition in the market. So that may be viewed as a con. Doesn't mean that you can't find something or that you won't love what you find, but it can be a con when we're in tight inventory. In addition, there may be some competition when it comes to cash buyers. In our market in New York City, cash buyers make up about 65% 90% of the purchases. That does not mean that cash buyers always win the offers. There are other factors. You heard me talking earlier in this video about that debt to income ratio and the liquidity. If a cash buyer is using all of their liquidity and has a very high debt to income ratio, then a cash offer may not be valid for a co-op board. But all those factors that we've been talking about, the higher interest rates, the stock market fluctuation, may make cash offers a little bit higher and a little bit better than what people who are worrying about carrying financing may be able to come in at. So that neutral market is a good thing. Deals can be done, but you have to balance it out with the other factors that are going on in the market. So are apartments still being bought and sold in New York City? Absolutely. This season is pretty much what I would consider normal. We're not really below our numbers. We're not experiencing a sink in sales or a change in sales. We're not at those really high numbers that we experienced a few years back either, which is why I say we're pretty much in a neutral market. I would almost say that this is a very normal market. It's a seasonal, normal market. It doesn't necessarily feel that way simply because of all the news going on and people's hesitation. There are lots of buyers, as I said, looking out there who are hoping to find something, not quite finding it. So it's preventing them from actually purchasing. But still, if we're looking at year-over-year numbers, pretty good and pretty strong market. So some of these cons may help you determine whether or not you really should buy in 2025, but I still maintain that New York City is almost always a good investment and that investment is going to appreciate over time and appreciate pretty well. So is 2025, in summary, a bad time to buy? Not necessarily. But again, it's highly personalized, and I would always advise you to work with a seasoned agent. I would be happy to go over this information with you personally and help guide you through this process of buying in New York City and see if you are ready to buy in New York City. All right, there you have it. Again, I'm Dewey Moss. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button to stay up to date on all things New York City real estate. And I'll see you next time.